The old man's body shook as 3 fists rained down. His cane lay broken on the asphalt. The crowd pressed closer, but no one stepped in. Only cameras, only silence. And then, a figure emerged from the chaos. Tall, dressed in a dark suit. His face caught the street lights, sharp as a blade. People recognized him instantly. A millionaire, a man of untouchable power. But he didn't come to give money. He didn't come to smile for cameras. He came to stand between life and death. And what he did in the next 60 seconds shattered every bystander's silence, shamed the city, and turned one frail black man's pain into a story the world would never forget. Samuel Carter was 71 years old, and his life stretched like a scar across America's history. He was born in a small southern town, where the color of his skin determined where he could sit, where he could walk, and even which water fountain he could drink from. His earliest memories were of signs nailed to doors that told him he did not belong. He grew up with the sound of his mother's whispered warnings. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention. Don't answer back. Survival was not taught in books. It was taught in silence. As a teenager, Samuel learned the rhythm of work before he learned the rhythm of freedom. At 16, he stepped into a steel factory, a place where machines roared louder than voices, and heat pressed down like a second skin. The air was thick with smoke and the bitter taste of iron. The pay was little, the hours endless, but he stayed. For 4 decades, he stayed. His hands toughened, his back bent, his body broke in places that never healed. Yet through every long shift, through every scar, Samuel carried himself with quiet dignity. He never had the chance to go to college. Dreams were luxuries he couldn't afford. His dream was simpler: to provide, to endure, to keep breathing in a world that often wished he wouldn't. Marriage had given him fleeting joy, but his wife had passed away far too soon. The loneliness that followed became part of his daily existence, stitched into the silence of his small, cramped apartment. Now retired, Samuel's life was reduced to routine. He rose early each morning, brewed black coffee in a chipped mug, and took slow steps to the park nearby. There, he fed the pigeons, watched children play, and traced old memories through the creak of swings and the laughter of strangers. That little park was his escape, his reminder of gentler days. But the city around him had grown harder, colder, and less forgiving. He felt it in the way shopkeepers narrowed their eyes when he entered their stores. He heard it in the hushed giggles of children who pointed at his limp, his cane, his bent shoulders. He sensed it in the silence of bus drivers who never met his gaze, in the way fellow passengers shuffled away from him, clutching their bags tighter. These were not overt attacks, not the open cruelty of his youth, but 1,000 small cuts that bled dignity away. Once, he stood too long by a shop window, admiring a pair of shoes he could never afford. A clerk stepped outside, arms folded, eyes sharp. "Can I help you with something?" The tone was not an offer, but a warning. Samuel nodded politely, walked away, and swallowed the sting. Another time at the supermarket, he carried his groceries to the counter only to have the cashier call over a manager, demanding to check his bag for theft. Nothing was missing. Nothing was stolen. But the humiliation lingered long after the bread and milk were put away. Yet Samuel never fought back. He had lived long enough to know that anger only fed the fire. He told himself that patience was strength, that silence was survival. But silence is heavy. It builds and builds until it presses against the chest, like stone. And though Samuel did not know it, this week would break that silence forever. The pigeons would scatter. The park would feel cursed. His name, once unknown to all but neighbors and passers-by, would echo across the city. And it would not be because of anything he said. It would be because of what was done to him and who chose to stand beside him. On Monday, Samuel's day began like countless others. The air was cool, the city streets restless. He shuffled with his cane past the bakery, inhaling the smell of fresh bread he could barely afford, A group of teenagers laughed as he passed, one imitating his limp with exaggerated cruelty. He heard the laughter, but didn't turn. By now, his ears were trained to ignore. Later that afternoon, on the bus, a woman clutched her purse when he sat beside her. She shifted, her body rigid, her eyes fixed forward as if proximity to Samuel was a threat. He wanted to tell her he was a grandfather once, that his pockets held only coins and crumbs for birds. But he said nothing. Silence. Always silence. That night, in his apartment, Samuel sat by the window, listening to the city hum. Neon lights flickered across cracked walls. He thought about his wife's laugh, about how the world had seemed softer when she was alive. He thought about the days in the factory, when sweat stung his eyes but his co-workers nodded in quiet solidarity. Now, solidarity seemed like a relic. Neighbors barely looked at each other. People kept their eyes glued to screens, capturing the world but never touching it. And Samuel, at 71, felt like he was fading, becoming invisible, except in the moments when cruelty forced him into view. He didn't know it, but Tuesday would change everything. Tuesday, with its merciless sun and restless crowd. Tuesday, when 3 shadows would block his path. Tuesday, when patience would meet its breaking point, and silence would shatter into violence. His sun burned without mercy that Tuesday, the air heavy and restless, and Samuel Carter only wanted bread. His cane tapped the pavement as he neared the market, unaware of the 3 young men leaning against a wall, their laughter turning sharp as he passed. Their eyes narrowed, their grins twisted, and suddenly they were blocking his path. Mocking. His limp, his cane, his age. Samuel tried to sidestep, but they closed in, predators circling. One snatched his bag, tossing it like a game until the loaf of bread spilled onto the concrete. When Samuel bent down to pick it up, a boot pressed against his trembling hand. The crowd gasped. Phones lifted. Whispers filled the air. But no one stepped forward. The taunts grew uglier, the words drenched in hate, the kind Samuel had heard all his life but never expected to endure again at 71. They shoved him back against the wall, his cane clattering to the ground, the bread crushed beneath their shoes. His heart pounded with fear and shame. But then a black sedan slowed across the street. A polished car door opened, and out stepped Marcus Ellington, the millionaire whose face adorned magazines and whose name commanded power. He was not known for kindness. His empire was built on dominance, not compassion. But in that moment, his gaze fixed on Samuel, and something shifted. The attackers sneered, expecting him to be just another spectator. But Marcus walked forward, slow and steady. Each step waited. The crowd hushed, breathless, as tension coiled tight. The men spat near his shoes, shoved him in the chest, but Marcus didn't flinch. He bent down, lifted Samuel's torn bag, picked up the bread, and placed it gently back into the old man's hands. That simple gesture cracked the silence louder than any shout. The balance shifted. The crowd inhaled as one. The attackers sensed it, pride unraveling into rage. A fist slammed into Marcus's shoulder, the crowd screaming, phones flashing. Another blow followed, wild and furious, Samuel stumbling beside him. But Marcus stood like a wall, shielding him, never striking back. The 3 men grew frantic, their kicks and shoves echoing off the concrete, Samuel's cane snapping underfoot, his knees buckling until Marcus caught him from falling. Chaos erupted, sirens wailing, security rushing in, bystanders screaming, some begging for it to end, while others cheered as if it were sport. And then, at last, the crowd moved. Hands grabbed, arms pinned, the attackers dragged down by the same people who had once stood frozen. In the center of it all, an old man, trembling, a millionaire shielding him, and 3 men shackled by their own shame. The image burned into every lens, every witness, searing itself into the city's memory. It would not fade. It would haunt them all. Sirens pierced the air as chaos swallowed the street, and in that storm of noise, the moment reached its breaking point. Samuel trembling with his crushed bread clutched to his chest, Marcus standing over him like an unmovable wall, and the three young men thrashing against the hands that finally held them down. Police swarmed, shoving the attackers into cars, their once proud sneers collapsing into fear under flashing blue lights. The crowd stood stunned, their silence heavier now than before, because they all knew what their cameras had captured. Not just violence, but their own inaction. That night, the image spread across the world. An old man humiliated, a millionaire shielding him, three predators exposed, headlines screaming, "Millionaire shields elderly black man from racist attack." Some called Marcus a hero, others doubted his motives, but Samuel knew the truth. It wasn't about wealth, it wasn't about fame. It was about one man refusing to look away. In the days that followed, protests surged through the city. Signs raised high. Justice for Samuel. Silence is violence. The attackers were charged, their arrogance shattered, but scars remained. Samuel rarely returned to the park, the laughter of children now tinged with menace, the pigeons flying. Without him, Marcus visited often, not as a savior, not as a millionaire, but as a man who had seen cruelty with his own eyes and chosen to step forward. The city moved on, as cities always do, but that single image lingered, seared into collective memory, proof that silence feeds hatred and that one act of defiance can tear it apart. And yet the question hangs in the air, sharp as glass. If three men could humiliate an old man in front of hundreds, and only one dared to step in, what happens the next time? How many more Samuels walk among us every day, unseen and unprotected? Comment your thoughts below and subscribe if you believe these stories must continue to be told.